Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Therapist Connect broadcast. And if you're watching at the Private Practice weekend, Private Practice 2021, Surviving and Thriving in Uncertain Times, welcome as well. So I am here for a very special interview today. So it's one of our Therapist Connect Lifetime Achievement interviews. And we're here today with Dr. Aaron Balik. So I'll introduce you in a moment, but hello, welcome. So Dr. Aaron Balik is an author, an international speaker, obviously a therapist, CEO of Still Point Spaces, which is an international hub for the exploration of psychology. So he has more than 20 years of clinical experience and is an academic, a psychotherapist committed to sharing ideas and values from therapy and kind of taking them outside of the consulting room into, I guess, life. So he holds the academic post of Honorary Senior Lecturer at the Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies at the University of Essex, and is based in Still Point Spaces in London, but also travels between the various still points within Europe. So so it's so good to have you today. I guess a good place to start might be, I don't know, just how you became a therapist, how you got into this type of work.
Right. Well, kind of in a funny way, really. You can tell from my accent probably that I'm not originally from London, though I definitely consider myself a Londoner these days. But it wasn't an easy ride being able to stay here in this country. So I was a student a lot of the time. Part of that was out of interest, and the other part was to get continuing student visas so I could stay in the UK. And one of those visas was a master's degree in continental philosophy. And part of that degree had Freud in it. And I know he's not the most super popular guy these days, though I tend to kind of stand behind him sometimes for some of his brilliant ideas. But I kind of, just in doing this course for my visa to stick around, I'm like reading this stuff and my mind is just being blown every single day. And at that stage, I didn't want to be an academic, and I didn't want to be sitting around writing papers about psychoanalysis. That actually happened later anyway. But in kind of this moment of inspiration, I realized that this is actually something you can do in the world with people. And it was sort of reading Freud in my master's degree that I thought, next stop, I'm going to train to be a psychotherapist.
Okay, so actually you went a bit round the houses. You didn't want to be an academic. Then you became a therapist, and then you kind of got back into.
I was sure I wasn't going to be an academic, actually, somehow. It came and happened anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so obviously we can talk a little bit about your work, your many years' work as a therapist. Have you always worked in private practice, or did you kind of move into that?
I moved into it. So my first job, which is actually a really formative job, was working in further education. So I worked in student support at City and Islington College, which is probably still one of the UK's largest further education colleges. And I worked there in student services, student advice, and counseling, and ended up managing the counseling team there before I left. But I started that actually before I finished my training. So my very first job was an employed job in a very demanding atmosphere, let's say. So it was another training on its own.
Sure, absolutely. And it sounds like you stayed there. So you stayed there for how long?
Oh gosh, I was there for probably about 3 or 4 years. Then I moved, I think I was 4 days a week towards the end, starting my private practice 1 day a week, very, very slowly. And then I moved into mostly private practice, but throughout my career, I've kind of been a mixed portfolio kind of a guy. So, later on, I was faculty at University of Essex. So I was lecturing there while I was having a part-time private practice. Been a school counselor as well, but that was 1 day a week. So I was doing my private practice 4 days a week. And there's always been like teaching, training, public speaking, a little bit of consultation the whole time. So it's not like full-time, everyday client work, private practice throughout my entire career.
Yeah, I mean, you called yourself a mixed portfolio guy there, and I mean, yeah, I loved. We obviously chatted a little bit before, and I was reading up on, you know, kind of your website and things like that, and yeah, I mean, we're obviously going to talk about some of this today, all the different things that you do, but I guess for some of the private practitioners watching. This is quite typical, I suppose, of being a private practitioner. I mean, I myself, I went straight into. I did have a brief role, but I kind of was almost straight into private practice and went full time. And you know, I know that maybe these days a lot of people kind of might do that, but I think for a lot of people there is often a crossover between working and then kind of just building up the private practice. So I don't know if you've got any, because obviously it's been a long time you've been in private practice, so I don't know if you've got any anything to say in how you experience that.
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot to say about private practice and about, in some ways, how badly we're trained to do private practice. You know, maybe we might be quite well clinically trained, but most of us aren't particularly trained in business, marketing, even invoicing, how we price ourselves, all of that kind of stuff, and the risks, you know, that you take as a private practitioner. And you know, it's kind of with private practice, it can kind of be like a shit or get off the pot kind of a situation, in the sense that it's very hard to build a private practice when you're doing other stuff, and you're kind of stuck often in doing other stuff, particularly when you're coming out of training, because obviously you need to earn a living and you can't make a private practice overnight. But there have been several times in my career, particularly when I was working more full-time, as I was at City and Islington College, trying to build a private practice while working 3 or 4 days a week, where there's a tipping point where it's like you can't necessarily wait any longer until things look perfect, and you have to sort of get off the pot and commit yourself to that private practice and start building it, and really giving it your attention. And I think that's a tension a lot of people aren't quite sure how to handle.
Yeah, it's such, I mean, a couple of the things you said there, such good points. Yeah, that when do I go, when do I kind of, you know, and that is a lot to do with private practice, because of course it's exciting, but it's full of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns. So it is a bit like, when do you make that leap? But then also you have to be very practical in that as well, because like you say, it's a business, and you're trying to factor in all those kinds of things like earning money and stuff like that.
Yeah, which is also kind of, you know, it's kind of taboo, you know, in a way we're not supposed to say it's a business. It seems to me in the field, right? And that it is not a way that we should make money, and the whole money part's really difficult. And yet, particularly when you're in private practice, it's really important how you make that money, because you don't have the support of an institution with regard to pension or sick pay or overheads and all of that stuff. And again, it's one of those things that most of us learn, you know, well into private. Like, I don't think I had got my head around that stuff until even maybe 10 years into private practice, how important it was to think all that stuff through.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of work I've been doing at the moment with the BACP has been really about that, trying to say those more taboo things. I wrote a paper which was negotiation of the ethical therapeutic practice, or negotiation of the business with ethical therapeutic practice. And I felt it's that kind of thing. You're not supposed to quite say it, you know.
Right. Not really a business.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know, how even questioning that there could be things that kind of rub against those things as well. So yeah, such a good point. I mean, I guess in some ways this is why I admire your still point spaces, because obviously, and you know, please do tell all the viewers about still point, but I guess there's a lot that you do there, but of course it must help having lots of different practitioners working there. So there's that sense of kind of networking, but I guess also sharing those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, the vision of Still Point has always been this kind of beyond the consulting room idea. And It's really difficult, because we live in a capitalist economy that has certain demands on us as individuals working in it, right? One has to earn a living. And if you're creating spaces, low-cost spaces, for example, to help people who might not necessarily have the funds for private psychotherapy, you're personally taking the hit for that. It's not happening through a state-funded charity or that sort of thing, where that's sort of the purpose. So you have to make really, I think you have to dig down deep and decide how much of that you want to do and how you support that lower cost work with other work and that sort of thing. And the reason why I bring that in is because I feel like there has to be more than one way to support people. And it's not just low cost counseling, because there's only so much of that we can provide as individuals in private practice or outside of that. So I think it's much more creative to think about how you bring creative therapeutic practice into a whole bunch of different zones in people's lives through workshops and through seminars and through groups and through making really good quality psychological service available more widely. And I think we also, while I still think, I'm still primarily a psychotherapist, I tend to be a long-term psychotherapist. I still really respect that 1 day a week routine for years sometimes. It's not necessarily the best thing for some people either, regardless of what they can pay. It just doesn't speak to them. So can we find other ways that people can engage in therapeutic work that doesn't necessarily demand that kind of consistency, necessarily doesn't demand that kind of investment? Can we use technology in order to help us do that? So a lot of the work that Still Point does is tries to provide therapeutic spaces in addition to counseling ones that can speak to lots of different people in lots of different ways.
Wow. I mean, it sounds amazing. And of course you said, so was the first Still Point, was it here in London?
No, actually, it started up in Zurich a little bit before my time. And the founders of that original place were all training to be Jungian analysts. And like you do, got very excited about the kind of ideas that come up in psychotherapy. And we're running free events. There was a whole series of events called Psychoanalysis on the Streets, which I started running here in London with a colleague of mine, Sissy, which were kind of about just creating spaces for people to talk about psychology and depth psychology, particularly at that time, and applying it to daily life. So we would be talking about sex, we'd be talking about money, we'd be talking about politics. It wasn't therapy, but it was like using those skills to create spaces again. So yeah, that started off in Zurich and Berlin. And then afterwards, we started doing that here in London before we found a space. And then after we got the space in 2016, we started hosting those events and a whole variety of other events, including counseling and psychotherapy here at Still Point Spaces London.
Wow. I mean, there's just so much that goes on there. And of course, if anyone wants to check that out, do look up Still Point Spaces. And I think, I mean, there's so much that I think you and I could talk about, because we have quite similar interests. But I just really, as you know, I love your TikTok videos that you do as well, which I guess it's a similar kind of thing to what you're talking about, but actually you're doing this in your own space. So this is your Twitter space, Twitter land, and Instagram and TikTok. But it's that same kind of principle, is it? Trying to make it like things that you would talk about in therapy and theories of therapy, trying to make them as accessible as possible.
Exactly. I mean, here's the line that I've always been trying to tread, and that I try to tread with Still Point, which sometimes we do and well, and maybe sometimes not so well, which is to really hold the quality and tradition that comes from, more than 100 years of psychotherapy, and trying to make it contemporary and accessible by stretching its boundaries without undermining its core, right? So like, how do you do that? Like, TikTok's kind of an experiment, and one of the experiments there was really for myself. Whether it works on TikTok, I don't know, but can you describe an ego defense in psychoanalytic terms in a 60-second TikTok video, and will people care? So the idea there isn't, and it could still go that way, the kind of hashtag life hacks kind of thing. I think they're not harmful. There's a lot of harmful psychology on TikTok and in social media, but can you convey really well researched, long respected ideas in different media. And, one of the things that we did early here, which was also, an in real life event that challenged a lot of people, was the speed data therapist that we used to run on our open houses downstairs here. And the idea there is that we would open up our consulting rooms to the public. We would have therapists sit in there, and if the door was open, you could just walk in for free, have a 10-minute conversation, and then walk out and then walk into another room and have another 10-minute conversation with another therapist. And people really found that very challenging. Lots of our community wouldn't participate because it felt like it really was outside, the classical boundaries of how we should be doing this work. But for me, it was really like, people don't get the opportunity to sit in a consulting room and have a conversation, without either shelling out quite a big sum of money, or feeling like they have to commit to someone because they've come to that session and then I have to go back and say no. Or if you want to meet 4 or 5 different therapists, that you have to often pay for an assessment session 4 or 5 times before you decide who that's going to be. So this was like another kind of thing, like, okay, how can we make people in therapy more accessible, at least in the beginning, and start thinking about how those obstacles can be removed. And TikTok is a similar thing. It's just kind of happening online, I guess.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. I was thinking about it in the development of therapy throughout the years, because you were talking there about where's that line, and how do you keep true, I guess, to the purity of what people were saying, but I guess also in terms of therapy, keep true to ethics and stuff like that. But also, when you were talking, I was just thinking, exploration is the right word, because or experiment, it's like, being able to it's like research in a way, isn't it? And where does therapy go, actually, as time goes on?
Yeah, and we have to experiment, and experiment inherently has risks. And we're a very risk-averse profession, and we should be risk-averse because we're dealing with, vulnerable human beings. But at the same time, you're not going to grow as a profession unless that experimentation happens. So, it takes some thought, it takes some accountability, it takes some responsibility, but you can dig down and you can, I think, make a pretty good assessment as to whether or not your experiment's going to be, all right enough to try out.
Absolutely, yeah. How have you guys, Still Points, and you for yourself as well, how have you found the pandemic times? About a year and a half, a bit over that. Yeah, I don't know where you start a question like that.
Yeah, it sucked. It sucked hard. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's funny. Still Point's a funny thing, because we had developed an online platform for practice, like a encrypted video conferencing platform, way back in the day. I mean, that was in development in 2015. It was never any good, and we ended up abandoning it because things like, Zoom could develop things much quicker, and we don't like Zoom, but the other encrypted platforms that people can use, they were just better than ours. But we were always trying to measure this, should we be promoting online work before the pandemic, when we really prized that face-to-face work? And it was kind of an expedient, pragmatic thought that, we were also founded by lots of expats. So we were people living in countries that we weren't born in and working with clients across national boundaries. So in a way, we wanted to identify that and make it easier for people, but also do that responsibly. So we carried out some research to understand how to better conduct online therapy. And the great irony is that by the time COVID kicked off, we realized that we weren't technical people. We couldn't actually develop a technology any better than real IT developers did. So we were abandoning the platform about the time COVID happened. And we were really relying on our spaces, and then our spaces emptied out, and that was really hard. And while it's very hard to put a good spin on it, the one thing that we did manage during that period when we weren't focusing on the spaces is kind of created our online community, and all of the events that we used to run in the individual spaces in Berlin and Paris and London, we started running online, and found that people who were attending from the local spaces could go, people who'd heard about us from far afield started coming, and then actually the events program became much more popular. So we started running these free open conversations. We created an online community where people could come, and that was open to clinicians and the psychologically curious. So it actually, on the one hand, really opened us up, but on the other hand, really emptied us out. It was a very, very difficult period for our spaces during that time. In fact, we had to close the first one that opened in Zurich, because we just couldn't afford to keep all these places open.
Yeah, absolutely. These are really challenging things when it's come to the pandemic, and I suppose a lot of private practitioners as well will have faced these kinds of questions. Do I give up my consulting room? Do I not? And of course, for spaces like Still Point, I can see how this would have just been so difficult. Are you kind of beginning to get things up and running now, or
Seems like in the past 4 to 6 weeks it's been warming up again, which is a great relief. Here in our space here, we have I'm in the library upstairs at Still Point Spaces London. We have like an open plan psychological co-working space, and we have the rooms downstairs. And what was so great about this space pre-pandemic was you would have people who weren't therapists working upstairs who just wanted to work in a space like ours. And then you would also have the clinicians from downstairs coming up to write their notes and to hang out. You had a really warm, flowing community of clinicians and non-clinicians, which I think is really unusual. Usually in spaces, you just have clinicians. At conferences, you just have clinicians. Our events in the space up here, we really wanted to encourage and invite that mixture of different perspectives. And yeah, so I'm like looking into the event space now, which is still a little bit quiet, but people are coming back, and we are hoping to have those mixed spaces happen again.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I might come in the new year. I'm here in South London.
You should definitely come.
I just, the isolation in private practice. I mean, this is something obviously we talk about a lot, but it sounds, just when you were talking there, I was like, oh, that sounds like a dream, actually, just sitting with other private practitioners, other people doing the work. So, well, I really hope it is, and let's fingers crossed that keep going the same way. One of the things that we're talking about on this weekend is a little bit about social media, because obviously there's big questions around therapists using social media, private practitioners using social media, personal space, personal social media sites for professional reasons, what platforms you use, all of this kind of thing. And I know that this is a real specialist area for you. So do you want to tell everyone a little bit about the work that you've done on this?
Sure. I mean, it's so funny because my whole professional life, the way it looks now, was kicked off by a really super random event. And I'll tell the short version story of it because it's actually in my book on social media. But the really kind of thumbnail sketch is years ago, I think it might have been 2013 now. I had my consulting room out of my flat in Islington in North London, and I was just up late one night working in my office, and I heard this really spooky sound coming out of the corner of my room. I lived in an old Edwardian terraced house, so we always had problems with mice and stuff, and I had expected to move these papers aside and see this mouse run across the room. But I pulled the papers aside, and I saw this giant 9-inch venomous centipede crawl out from under this paper and up my wall. It was this monstrous thing. You couldn't believe that this was for real. It was like midnight. It was so weird. And I ran into, it's like, why is he telling us this story, right?
This is a story for Halloween, right?
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, this is a totally Halloween story. And actually you can, I wish I had a picture of it to show you. There is a picture to show you, but you just know that this is something that doesn't come from the UK and that you shouldn't touch. Like, it looks scary. So I went in the kitchen, I grabbed a Tupperware, I trapped it in the Tupperware, closed it off. And the very next day I called the London Zoo and said, what should I do with this? And they said, you should take it down to the Natural History Museum and have it identified. That's the next thing I did. And 10 minutes later, I'm talking to the chief entomologist at the Natural History Museum. He's like amazed because this thing definitely came from thousands of miles away and was dangerous and venomous. And how did it get here? And he was very excited about it. And then the press secretary from the museum said, oh, this would be great for our sort of like Friends of the Museum newsletter. You know, can we use it as a story? And I said, yeah, sure. I just didn't really think it through, but she was a press secretary. What do press secretaries do? You know, they make press releases and they want to get news around stuff that's going on for their organizations. And the next day I was on the phone to, you know, BBC Radio 1, BBC Radio 4, BBC Wales. It was all over the newspapers in the kind of like other news section, you know, Islington psychotherapist finds 9-inch centipede in flat. So suddenly, like, the biggest thing about me in the world on Google was finding this centipede. And it had consequences for me in my practice and for my clients. And clients were coming, they'd heard about it, they wanted to talk about it. One was particularly upset about it. And this really got me thinking. And my supervisor just was not up to the task, you know, hardly knew what Google was, you know, it was early days, you know, not used to people being discovered in this fashion. So just needing to understand it more, I wrote a paper called TMI and the Transference, LOL. People didn't even know what TMI and LOL meant. Maybe your listeners will because they're Twitter savvy. But it was just to understand it, right? Just to understand and work through what had happened. And then off the tail of that, I wrote the book, The Psychodynamics of Social Networking, which was intended to be a crossover book because, again, you know, that will to not always just talk to therapists was always in me. And I just wanted to explore from a psychological, particularly a relational psychoanalytic point of view, what social media means in the world, not just between therapists or therapists and their clients, which is a very long answer to a question that you asked, which is probably more about how should we be doing Twitter and Facebook and
no, I'm so pleased with this answer. I mean, it's amazing though. It's just amazing. I was thinking, oh, you know, by the way, anyone who doesn't know, TMI, too much information, LOL, laugh out loud. That's right, isn't it? I'm just doubting myself. You know, but yeah, just this kind of, this movement of information, you know, and really interesting for you, because I was thinking when you were saying, this is now the biggest thing that's happened to me. We're talking about all this stuff and, you know, your CV and everything. So what an interesting kind of way into that. And of course your book, The Psychodynamics of Social Networking, in case anyone wants to check that out. I mean, where are you at with it now? Do you kind of, you retain an interest in this?
Yeah, very, very much so. And that book came out in 2014. And a lot has happened in those years. And in that book, I was really like, I took a very neutral position at a time when social media was looked at quite skeptically and with some horror in our professional field. But things have changed so much that I'm probably a lot less optimistic about social media than I was when I wrote the book. A lot of that had to do with events of 2016, Cambridge Analytica, the role that social media played in the elections that year, in the Brexit vote. Like really pernicious stuff was happening across social media. Really pernicious stuff is happening now in relation to, you know, vaccine avoidance and that kind of stuff, misinformation. The algorithms that we know about, we didn't know about a whole lot, or at least I didn't know a whole lot about in 2014. So I hate to say that my comfort level with the contemporary manifestation of social media is a lot lower than it was when I wrote the book in 2014, where I saw real breakout opportunities. And I think those things still exist, but they're harder to find when we see all of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think different platforms kind of different in that sense as well. I mean, I know you're very much on Twitter, as am I. And I mean, this is the second discussion that we're holding on social media. The first one we did was around Christmas, and even during that short time, it feels like we spoke about so much in that first one, but already we're like, you know, Peter and myself kind of eager to do the second one, because there's so much that has kind of come up, and the different sides of social media as well, which I think can be also interesting, how that is with the with the therapy world, with politics and our profession and stuff like that, pros and cons. Obviously, there's a lot of I guess during the pandemic time for me, is in particular, there's been a lot of scope for forming friendships or networks or whatever, online, which you would never have had before. But I don't know why I started this, because there's so much that I could list in terms of things that go on. And am I right in thinking sorry, go on, Aaron.
Well, I mean, you very grandly entitled this talk the Lifetime Achievement Interview, and I think I kind of want to give it back in a way to you and to Peter, because I think Therapists Connect in the period of a year has been one of those breakout spaces, and I think the two of you and all of you that are involved and all of the people that follow and participate, I think you should pat yourselves on the back, because there was no such thing as therapist Twitter, and it's not always a beautiful thing for sure, but I think what you guys have done is created a space and an opportunity for connection that previously wasn't there for people who are geographically scattered and interested in therapy. And it's actually really remarkable how quickly it became what it is. So well done to you all.
Thank you. That really means a lot, actually, you saying that. I just think I liked chatting with you, because I know we have a lot of the same interests in this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's good to hear people outside's kind of view of it as well.
Sure.
I think it'd be interesting as well to see where Therapists Connect sits once the pandemic, once it's kind of completely on its way or whatever, in terms of how communities evolve or stay the same, or what on earth happens with that. So I guess it really strikes me how you've done a lot in your career. I love your thinking around how to, really get the values of what therapy is about and take them outside of the consulting room, and find those different ways to I guess really help people. I mean, in amongst all the different things you've done, you've been an agony uncle at some point as well.
Yeah. I think that was also, I've been really lucky in the opportunities that I've had that have really challenged my training and my expectations for what it was going to be a psychotherapist. And that's one of them. And that also came out of my experience at City and Islington College. So I guess I want to say that when I was working there, I wish I had been able to learn it earlier, but it was a real education for me in what people need and what people don't need and what I was trained to offer. So, there I was, kind of relatively traditionally trained. I'm integratively trained, but I went on further training in psychoanalysis. But, offering that consistent object, to be in that space 50 minutes once a week. But I'm working with young people. I'm working with people from all around the world. I'm working from people with dire economic need, refugees and asylum seekers, people with serious housing troubles, people with serious family situations, and expecting them to come join me in literally, it was a broom closet. People do say, they put you in a broom closet in these places, but we were literally in a broom closet, then in a photocopier room. But expecting them to come see me on my terms, right? Because I felt that it needed to be every Tuesday at 2 for 50 minutes, because that's how I'd learned how to do counseling. And so I was bad at it, in that first year and a half, until I allowed myself to be impacted by what the student needs were and be able to start to shift my training to meet that a bit more. And that meant being more flexible about times. That meant stepping out into the hallways and into the classrooms. And, I think people probably know this a bit better now, and maybe hopefully it's more part of trainings, I don't know. But then I applied for this job as it was first an agony uncle for the BBC Teens website. So that was kind of writing content to questions that were sent in. I was so amazed that I got that job. It was this dream job. And then suddenly you're not doing therapy anymore, right? You're giving advice, which is also a no-no. So how do you give advice that's good enough and retains its authenticity towards our models of therapy and counseling and listening? And then that turned into the agony uncling on Radio 1, which happened probably across about 10 years or something. And then you're on the radio where like you try to draw somebody out and the presenter's saying, you know, no dead space on the radio, you know, give them an answer. You can't just keep asking questions, you know, demand that you kind of do radio in a particular way, which is how radio's done. So how do I deploy those skills that way? So, I mean, they were really challenging things, but I think it's not an accident that I ended up doing what I'm doing now and looking at things like social media and whatever, because it seems like every, I don't know, environment that I walked into that wasn't the four walls of a quiet consulting room where you control most everything, at least in terms of what you're setting out. All the other environments have challenged me to do something completely different.
Yeah, but they all kind of, like you say, they all kind of link together. And I guess again, that's about moving forward. So, okay, what do I need to do with boundaries? Maybe be more flexible, and maybe that leads me into more relational working or whatever. But yeah, it just you know, I kind of I admire your passion actually for all of this, you know, and that actually when you're interested in something, you're kind of, yeah, you're really getting into it. And so in that sense, you're being a therapist, you're being a therapist in the room, you're being a therapist out of the room, and you're also really, you know, giving a lot to our profession as well, actually.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, you're not seeing the torturous inside of that role, which is, you know, because you're always asking yourself every time, is this right? Am I breaking the rule? You know, even going on to Twitter the first time, and even the TikTok, you know, just like, should I be doing this? Is this right? Am I breaking the bound? It can seem quite, I don't know, confident or secure. And I think there is, now that I'm, you know, well into my career, there's probably more of that, but there's a lot of fear to be overcome too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for someone like me, I mean, I've been like 10 years or something in this profession, practicing. But you know, actually, for me to hear that, because I do feel that sense of you know, I don't know. Sometimes it feels a bit like a straitjacket. Like, what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? And then that is tricky when you are trying to, you know, move with the times actually, and you know, have things evolving. But like you say, you really honor the heart of therapy and exactly what you're doing. And you know,
that's the real balance. How do you stay today, and how do you take risks, and how do you experiment while honoring authenticity, integrity, boundary? You know, boundaries are still really important. And I know you asked about social media before, but how people maintain their boundaries when they're public therapists, it's a huge one. And it's a huge one that I don't think enough work is done. I know a lot of people are looking into it at the moment, but you know, we do have a responsibility for the profession, for our clients, and for ourselves when we're out there in a public space, and we need to hold that really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm conscious of time. We've probably got about 5 minutes left today. So I wanted to ask you, because you talked so much about your passions within this work, but you know, what do you like to do outside of it? I don't know, hobbies or anything. Tell me a little bit about you, just whatever you're saying.
Okay, well, I love traveling. So the last 18 months has been pretty difficult, but I'm a real foodie. So I love traveling and eating lots of regional foods and cooking and that sort of thing. I'm a big film buff. I'm a big TV buff as well. Obviously, I like writing a lot. My new hobby, obviously, if I can find more time for it, is making TikTok videos.
Yeah.
You know, when I was an undergrad, actually, I changed my major 3 times as an undergrad. I was a pre-med student first, and then I was a filmmaking student, and then I ended up with an English degree. But the filmmaking side, I kind of had to give it up because it's just too, I mean, making films was super hard, right? You got to think about sound, you got to think about lighting, you got to think about, you know, we were working in film, like 16 millimeter film. It's a nightmare. But with TikTok, you just have to turn your phone on, and like all of those editing tools are there, and it's just like it just makes it so easy. So it's kind of funny when we were joking about it a bit before, but it goes way back probably to my filmmaking days. So media, technology, just a general curiosity I have to kind of just stick my nose in all of these interesting phenomena that are happening with modernity. I don't know if that's really so much a hobby, but there's a short listing of things that excite me.
Yeah, definitely. And I saw you talking about kind of film and TV. I saw you posted about Buffy the Vampire Slayer the other day, and I wondered if you're a big Buffy fan. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even get into Buffy until I was into my 20s, and I was like, wow, how did I miss all of the gold and treasure in this?
Brilliant. Yeah, is there anything that you wanted to say that we haven't covered?
I don't know. There's always something that I could say, I think. I suppose given this opportunity, I know that this is also part of a conference on private practice. This is of interest to counselors and therapists, probably at very different stages of their training. I know it's my passion, and I don't want to like foist my passion on anybody else, but I guess there's an invitation there too, which is to really think about the next 10 years of our profession. At least, these days, 10 years happens really quickly, and all sorts of unexpected things can happen in 10 years. And I know from therapy Twitter that there's a lot going on in that sort of the field is very polarized, the field is very politicized. There's a lot of need. We're operating in really extraordinary contexts. And I think it's happening more than when I was coming up as a therapist, but I think that therapists, I think the role of psychotherapy and counseling, we have to be more participative in the world, that we cannot, and I think this is why Therapists Connect is so great, because it is in the world. But we can't sit in our consulting rooms and bemoan how relationships are falling apart because of Facebook, and then talk to each other at conferences bemoaning social media to each other. Like, that's, there's room for that, and we all like to have a little moan with our colleagues and that sort of thing, but we should be out there, and I'm talking about things like Facebook. I mean, we should be out there talking to Facebook. We should be out there talking to Instagram. They talk to consumer psychologists. They talk to psychologists who are interested in maintaining engagement and what kind of buttons to put where and what colors to make those buttons. They speak to people who want to increase their aims. And what psychotherapy can bring onto the scene, which I don't think would be necessarily dismissed by developers, because if their social media can be used for good, then great, they get to talk about it. How can therapists be engaged in the process of understanding how technology can be used to increase engagement, increase relating, decrease siloing and filter bubbles? We should be participating in conversations about technology and culture and society, not standing at the sidelines saying what we're doing is real relationships and that's all garbage and I don't want to have anything to do with it. Which doesn't mean that everybody needs to engage in it in the same way, or everybody needs to be an activist or anything like that. I just think that there aren't enough of our contemporary relational, emotionally intelligent skills out there in the world where these things are being developed, and we have so much to offer, and I wish we would do that more.
Definitely. I'm not even going to add anything to that. It's a good piece of wisdom to end on. It really, really is. Dr. Aaron Balik, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you. And yeah, take care. Catch up soon.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Cass.
No worries.